Am I audible now? Am I audible? Am I audible? Hello, hello, hello. I think I should be audible now. Let me see. Am I audible? Am I still not audible? Yes, yes, it's okay now. Yes, I think I am finally audible. Some kind of setting had to be changed. So once again, welcome back to the Ask Abhijit Show episode, whatever it is, 216. And I hope you're all doing great. And it's great to see you all. I'm going to take questions from the live chat today, the questions that you will ask me now in real time. And let me see who all is there on the live chat. I can say Geopolitics enjoyer Surinder Gupta, Mahendra Pratap, Kumar Vishwajit, Mallikarjun Patel, Bijoy Kumar Deb, Mriganka Bonia, Ganesh Saini, Star Lord, Matrix, Ashavadi, Shivani Maheshwari, Om Bekerikar, hello. Rahul Yadav, Trupti Patil, Blue 3, Shri Devi, Kahan Barwad, Satwik Jaju, hello sir. Good to have you here. Rohit Rajput, scientist, Mohammed Ismail, feminist slayer, Ashavadi, Python Gaming, Samarpan Singh, Guru Kant Mukhe, Mayank Masani, Ahlavat, Saurabh Sinha, Sunit Reddy, Om Deshmukh, Yash Sonavane, Piyush, Chirag Sharma, Famous Talks, Let's See Nature, Prashant Doddi, Gopinath Besra, Alvin Rodriguez, Nabanita Das, Geopolitical Dube, hello, Vinit Rai, Slayer, Nikhil Rao, and everybody else. Okay, I'm gonna stop reading you all as always. We can start taking questions. Janvi, Jaiswal, McLovin, and so many others. So we'll start with the questions. But before I take the questions, I'll address a question that people have asked lots of times, and I get this question a lot of times in the comments in the live chat as well, as to why have I switched off? Why don't I use the super chats? Why don't I enable the super chats on this channel? And the answer is very simple. A lot of my viewers are students, and students can't afford to pay money to ask to have the questions answered. I have been a student myself. I haven't forgotten how it was. When you're a student, you're broke, more or less, unless you're really fortunate. So, and I don't want to create a situation where I start taking money to answer questions. I think that's not for me. I'm sure there are lots of other channels that do that. Good for them. That's not the kind of thing I do. Okay, so I will never take money to answer questions. I will not treat people differently based on whether they can pay money or not. Everybody is the same. Absolutely no super chats. If you want to contribute something, there are other options to contribute. I think there is super or something else. So I'm sure you can figure it out if you want to. It's not important. Okay, so yeah, that's the point. So I hope that addresses that particular question that many people probably had. Okay, questions. Mohammed Ismail says, could you provide an update on the current situation in Ukraine and offer insights into the potential direction of the ongoing conflict? Okay, so what's happening? There's not much movement on the map, right? Usually, when you have a war that's ongoing in which one nation invades another nation, you're gonna see changes. You're gonna see lines on the map changing, right? The current whatever the current battlefront is, whatever the front lines are, those lines keep changing, and territory exchanges hands and so on. So let's go to the map of Ukraine, s- of the region, since we are dealing with a geopolitical issue. So here is the map. We go towards Ukraine, and so this map that you see over here on the screen, it doesn't represent what's really happening on the ground. Crimea, you can see, is now part of Russia. Russia has retaken Crimea. That happened in 2014. That's old news. And when it comes to Russian advances in Ukraine, they certainly have taken the Luhansk, Donetsk regions, which is the eastern parts of Ukraine, Mariupol, I'm sure, and so on. They haven't moved on Odessa yet, and they are kind of on the southern bank of the Dnieper River when it comes to the city of Kherson. Uh, and that's the kind of situation we have, and it's kind of a frozen war situation now. Okay, there isn't much happening. Of course, the war has taught everybody else a lot of lessons on as to what kind of technologies are now going to be employed on the battlefield in 21st century battlefield. So when the war started, you had a certain set of weapons that was being used, tanks and all the standard weapons. But As the war progressed, the weaponry changed. Now you have lots of drones that are being used, loitering weapons, loitering munitions, suicide drones, kamikaze drones, the Shahed 2 drones. There are anti-personnel drones that are being used. There are minefields that have been laid all over the place. It's a disaster, of course. It's a disaster. From a humanitarian perspective, from a civilian perspective, it's an absolute disaster. Okay. Uh, but the lines on the map aren't changing much now. There are battles going on, and it's low intensity warfare, and there are missile strikes happening. The Russians are striking at various Ukrainian positions, including mercenary positions in which you may have fighters, combatants from other countries apart from Ukraine. North Korea seems to have entered the fray in some way on the side of Russia. Ukraine is also hitting out at Russia in some way or the other, drone strikes or missile strikes. There is the big question that's on everyone's minds right now is whether the Americans will allow the Ukrainians to use long range strike weapons such as long range missiles, 100 kilometers plus range missiles. That's medium range, short to medium range, but yeah, in the context of this war, it's long range. And the Russians have said, Mr. Putin has said that if the Ukrainians use long range missiles that are or weapons that are NATO weapons, then we're going to treat that as well as a red line, and we reserve the right to retaliate and respond through any means necessary, which kind of tells you what it means, right? So there is always the danger of escalation. Okay, this is a proxy war. It's a proxy war between Russia and the West, Russia and NATO. NATO is owned by the US. So it's essentially a proxy war between Russia and the US. The proxy is Ukraine. And the first level of the proxy is Ukraine. The second level is NATO. Okay, NATO isn't directly involved, it's indirectly involved. And so on. So that's the situation. It's a frozen conflict to a large extent. It's a slow war scenario. Not much is happening right now. It has the potential to escalate very rapidly. And Russia is very content to wait as long as it needs to achieve its objectives. The objectives are the denazification of Ukraine and the demilitarization of Ukraine, and Ukraine becomes a neutral nation and no longer poses a threat to Russia. The kind of threat means, what do we mean by that? It means becoming either a member of NATO or a proxy of NATO, which it currently is. So Russia eventually would want to effect a regime change in Kiev, get rid of Mr. Zelensky and get somebody else, a pro-Russia person in place, and they would say that that's a neutral government, and perhaps the territories of Ukraine will change forever. The map of Ukraine will change forever. That's a situation. Um, Not much movement on the map happening right now, but it is a very dangerous flashpoint when it comes to the global geopolitical order. There's the potential for very rapid, unforeseen escalation that could happen anytime. So it's one of the most dangerous uh, situations that we are currently facing in the world right now. That is overall the situation. Nothing much more to say apart from that. Okay, now um, Surinder Gupta says, why does India have a very small number of diplomats? You mean the IFS, Indian Foreign Service, has approximately, I don't know what, 2,000 diplomats, roughly give or take 1,700 diplomats? And yeah, that's the way it has been. That's the way it has been since the Cold War, since the 20th century. And we are continuing that legacy. I mean, it makes sense to augment the number of diplomats we have. We need to have diplomatic missions everywhere in the world, wherever we have interests as a nation, national interests. Uh, if you take the example of nations like the US, they would have in excess of 10,000 diplomats, maybe more than 20,000 diplomats. When it comes to China, they would have a diplomatic corps that has a strength in the vicinity of 10,000. Russia would be similar. Singapore is far ahead of India in the number of its diplomatic strength. For some reason, India continues to hold on to its Nehruvian legacy. It does make sense to induct a lot more diplomats, especially young people, especially people from various backgrounds, not necessarily people who have come through the UPSC course, the UPSC route. You need diplomats who have specializations in various fields, not necessarily have gone through UPSC, you can obviously give them some training. You need people whose core competence is science, it's physics, nuclear physics, chemistry, biotechnology. You need people whose core competence is history. Let's say the history of a certain nation or a certain region. Let's say German history, or let's say Appalachian history, or let's say the history of the Sahel region of Africa, or the history of China. You need to have people who have deep specializations in such things, in such domains, very disparate domains, and you need to bring them into the diplomatic corps. That's what a nation does in order to pursue its interests to the fullest extent, and India doesn't do that. So it's rather strange and curious that after 10 plus years of Mr. Modi being in power, we still are kind of in the same we still have the same situation. I don't know why it persists. I mean, is it so hard to effect reforms within the government? I don't know. So if you ask me, it beats me. I don't get it. We need to have more diplomats. Of course, you see, every ministry does engage in diplomatic activity. Okay, let's say you have the Ministry of Commerce, Trade and Commerce. Okay, you do trade deals with various nations. There are trade deal negotiations going on with various nations across the world: Australia, the US, the EU, UK, whatnot. What are those negotiations? That's diplomacy, and the Indian Foreign Service won't be involved in that. The ministry officials will be involved in that. So that's also diplomacy. So actually, if you look at it that way, we have a much larger corpus of people who engage in active diplomacy. But the Indian Foreign Service, technically, if you just look at it from that perspective, is quite small. But we have all these ministries that have their own individual outreach, diplomatic outreach, and diplomatic efforts and activities in various domains. That does happen, but it does make sense to induct a lot more people into the diplomatic corps. People from, like I said, lots of different diverse backgrounds who have specializations in things that would really, give teeth to our diplomatic activity. So that's the kind of thing that should happen, but we're not there right now. Okay. Shivarali says, what was there in southern India when in the north there was the Indus Valley Saraswati Sindhu civilization? Okay, let us go back to the map and try and understand the situation. So, this is the map. Now, our history textbooks, our history teachers, your history textbook teachers will tell you that there was something called the Indus Valley civilization or Harappan civilization. And it was mainly in western and northern India. Okay, that's what they will say. Now, let me explain this to you in case you are new to the channel or you've not heard me say this before. That this was not some separate civilization that existed and disappeared. This so-called Indus Valley civilization or Harappan civilization, which should actually be called the Saraswati Sindhu civilization or Saraswati Sindhu phase of our history, it was not some separate civilization and some other people who lived there and they vanished. It was a certain phase of our history. Okay, us as in all of India, the entire subcontinent plus, which includes the people of Afghanistan, Pakistan, even Iran, the whole of the subcontinent, Bangladesh, everybody. You get the point. This was a phase, a certain time period, limited time period of our history. Our history goes back 10,000 years minimum. And the oldest era of our history is where you have what the historians call the pre-Harappan phase or whatever. Okay, and we know that we know that this civilization or this phase of our history was an urban phase of our history, and this entire region, the Saraswati Sindhu region, or this so-called civilization that existed there, its geographical extent was greater than Egypt plus Mesopotamia put together. Gigantic, huge, monstrous. Okay. The boundaries were essentially, it included parts of Afghanistan, much of, if not all of Pakistan, some parts of easternmost Iran, Gujarat, Rajasthan, Haryana, northern India, all the way to Madhya Pradesh and parts of Maharashtra. Huge geographical region. And what we saw in this region was complete standardization of weights and measure, the same language, the same symbols, the same culture, and all of that, which is a continuation, and that culture still continues today. The cultural elements that you see in that era of our history are still visible today, a lot of them. Similar gods, the same yoga poses, the same mangame sindoor, so the red oak, the red pigment that ladies put on their in the parting of their hair, the same bangles, and the same story of the crow and the pebbles, and so much more. Okay, so Pashupati worship, Shiva worship, bull worship, all of that. So we still have elements of that in today's Indian society, even though it is now eroding away very rapidly. But just like India today is an interconnected nation, even back then the whole of the subcontinent was interconnected. Now, our historians and archaeologists have not done enough to uncover the archaeological history of southern India and eastern India. That's why we don't know much as to what was going on in southern India and eastern India during the time period of during the Saraswati Sindhu phase of our history. Of course, now we are discovering sites like Kiladi and much more, but it's just baby steps that we are taking. So we are unfortunately facing a lack of archaeological evidence and data right now. A lot more needs to be done to uncover the interconnections between the various regions of the subcontinent. But just like today, the whole subcontinent was interconnected, and the Brahmi script is found even all the way down south in places like Kiladi and whatever other places we have. I forget the names right now. In Tamil Nadu, in Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, the Brahmi script, right, which is uh, a more standardized form of the Saraswati Sindhu script. So we have that everywhere, but we are facing a dearth and shortage of data points and evidence. So the ASI needs to get its act together and bring out more evidence, more archaeological evidence. But I assure you that the whole of the subcontinent was interconnected, and we had the same culture all over the place in different forms, of course, very different forms. Our culture manifests itself in a variety of different ways, some of which look very different from each other, but it's still the same culture if you go deeper. So that's what I can say. We need to do a lot more archaeological work, which is not happening for whatever reason. But yeah, hopefully someday, probably during our lifetimes, hopefully it will happen and we'll get to know more. All right. Okay, let's talk about the Western Asian region, Israel and Gaza and all that. So the question is by Shivam. What will Israel do next after Yahya? Do you think they're going to attack Iran? They did. If they do attack Iran, then will Russia be involved in this matter? Will Russia get involved in this? And Brijesh says, will Russia support Iran directly if Israel goes to war with Iran? Right? Okay, that's a question. So what's going on? That latest terrorist was killed recently. Yahya, his name or whatever his name is, the Hamas boss. He was taken out by a tank shell and so on. So what we are seeing is the decapitation of the leadership of Hamas by Israel. They're doing a very effective job at completely taking out the leadership structure of Hamas. And they've also obviously completely terrorized Hamas with the pager attack and all that, those remote control attacks. So it's like Hamas is very much on the back foot right now. And Hamas's biggest supporter is obviously Iran. Iran is a nation that punches way above its weight. It is a nation that is geopolitically very ambitious, very active. It has proxies all over the Middle East, Western Asian region, and so on. And Iran, as we know, regards two nations as its greatest adversaries with good reason. First is the US, United States. Iran calls the United States Shaitan e Bozorg, the great Satan. And the Americans have imposed sanctions and all kinds of things on Iran since essentially 1979. And the people of Iran have suffered tremendously as a consequence. It's siege warfare in the modern day. So one can understand why they consider the Americans to be so evil. And America's number one supporter or supportee, whatever you want to say, is Israel. And Iran considers it to be its number two enemy, or interchangeably number one. The Zionist regime, they call it, right? Uh, and Iran, perhaps by now, probably is a nuclear weapons power. There was that anomalous earthquake that happened somewhere in northern Iran, which is a region where you typically don't have earthquakes. Richter 4 or something on the Richter scale, which is very strange. So I personally consider Iran to be the 10th nuclear power now. And that's a problem for Israel, because Israel is an undeclared nuclear power, and it used to be the trump card. Now, if Iran also has nukes, then it's a big problem for Israel. And the whole deterrence scenario changes drastically. So, and we have had all these tensions between Iran and Israel, those drone strikes, missile strikes. The latest missile strike happened not too long ago. About 200 missiles were launched by Iran on Israel, and a lot of them hit their targets. And a lot of them carried rather small payloads, warheads, conventional warheads. But that kind of sends a signal. And they were able to bypass the Iron Dome system that Israel has, which is one of the most sophisticated anti-missile, ballistic missile defense systems, and so on. And recently, just 2 or 3 days ago, Iran hit Mr. Netanyahu's residence with a drone strike. And we're not sure if Mr. Netanyahu was there or not. But it's a direct assassination attempt on the Prime Minister of Israel. So, look, with all this as the context, it's pretty clear that Israel is going to respond in some way sometime soon, or sooner or later. And recently there was a leak out of the Pentagon. Clearly there's some kind of a mole inside the Pentagon, but the Israeli plans to attack attack Iran were some portion of that was leaked out, a couple of pages of the thing. So I think they're going to attack Iran at some point in time, at a time and place of their choosing, like you say, like they say. So the question now is, if the Israelis launch a significant attack on Iran, the question is Israel going to do this alone, or will the US also be involved? If the US is going to be involved, it's going to be involved from the sea, aircraft carrier strike groups. Is the US confident enough that it can take on Iran from an aircraft carrier? Iran has excellent missiles. So there's a whole lot of questions out there in the open. But let's say Israel attacks Iran in some way, airstrike, missile strike, whatever. What happens then? They could target Iran's nuclear development sites, where its nuclear weapons program is being developed, or civilian nuclear program, whatever it is being developed. It has various nuclear installations and sites. Those could be targeted. That could happen. And even the Iranian leadership could be targeted in Tehran, because they tried to target Mr. Netanyahu. So tit for tat, that sort of thing could happen. So the question is, what happens if Israel does this, if they attack Iran? Will Iran be on its own, or will there be some kind of Russian involvement? Chinese involvement is more or less out of the question, because the map tells us that China is way too far away to be able to take any real action. Okay, but Russia isn't too far away. It's just let's say about less than 500 kilometers away, Russian territory from Iran. So, and Iran has been supporting Russia in its special military operation in Ukraine. Iran has been supplying Russia with drones, Shahed 2 drones, and various other kinds of weaponry. So one can expect some kind of quid pro quo from Russia. Russia is in the process of selling a bunch of sophisticated fighter planes to Iran. I think the Sukhoi 57, which is the latest one they have, the fifth generation one. And is it the Sukhoi 57? Is it the Sukhoi 35? I'm not sure which one, but it's going to be selling a bunch of pretty good fighter planes to Iran. And maybe it may get involved in some way in the defense of Iran if Iran is on the back foot. So it's all speculation right now, but I would expect some kind of Russian involvement in some manner if there is an attack on Iran from Israel. But obviously, this is all speculation. I don't have the real intelligence, the real evidence as to what is being planned. But it makes sense strategically and logically for Russia to come to the aid of Iran. Iran is an important asset for Russia and China to have in the West Asia region. If Iran falls or gets defeated, then it completely changes the power dynamics in the region, the geopolitical balance of power, and it gives the United States and Israel and the West a tremendous upper hand in this region. And the strategic pact or agreement that China has signed with Iran becomes null and void. A 25-year strategic agreement in which China is going to invest at least $400 billion worth of money into Iran in exchange for a large quantity, very large quantity of discounted energy, which is petroleum, more or less, mainly. So Russia and China need Iran to continue to exist and remain strong in the region. So I think from that perspective, it makes logical sense for both of the nations in some way or the other to come to the aid of Iran. And Russia is much more in a position to be able to do this at short notice. So probably some kind of involvement from Russia will happen, especially if Iran goes on the back foot. That's what I think will happen. Okay, class says, will an East Asian conflict start from North Korea instead of China? North Korea blew up its bridge with South Korea and they're sending soldiers to Russia. China could use North Korea like how Iran uses its proxies. Well, I imagine it would be pretty common knowledge that North Korea is a Chinese proxy. That I think is known, should be known to everyone. North Korea is not an independent sovereign nation. It is a proxy of China. It's a vassal state of China. Just like South Korea is a vassal state of the US, just like Japan is under US occupation and a vassal state of the US. North Korea, I would not say it's under Chinese occupation, but it is very deeply beholden to China and it depends on China for so many things. Without China, North Korea probably can't survive. North Korea has gone through tremendous hardships because of Western sanctions. They have faced starvation, they have faced all kinds of difficulties. There have been terrible humanitarian crises in North Korea, but they have resolutely stood firm, one could say. It's kind of like the Chinese terminology of the way the Chinese write and speak. But they have been supported by China. They have had this barter system with China, which has allowed them, enabled them to survive. And for China, North Korea is a very valuable asset in the region, in the Korean Peninsula region. It kind of offsets and balances out to some extent the US presence in the region. And it's kind of the joker in the pack. It's the unpredictable, dangerous actor. It's Kim Jong Un, the Kim family. Nuclear weapons they have. They have very good long-range missiles that can strike, the US if they want, any part of the US, even the east coast of the US. So North Korea is a very good proxy and asset to have for China. And you're right, there are tensions right now that are ongoing between North Korea and South Korea. I'm not sure if there's a conflict that's going to emerge from here. But as you can see, North Korea can threaten South Korea as well as Japan, even Taiwan through via its missiles, its submarines, its navy, etc. So North Korea has a reasonably good navy. They have a very large number of submarines, way more than India, and they have good missiles, long-range missiles, ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles. So right now we are seeing tensions between North Korea and South Korea. Is it the standard routine saber rattling that happens from time to time, just to remind South Korea that you are our enemy and you are under threat, or is it something else? One hears recently that Mr. Xi Jinping, President Xi, instructed his one of his missile regiments to be ready for war and all that. Once again, that could just be rhetoric. One doesn't know. Usually, if you're gonna If you're planning for war, you don't telegraph it to your adversaries in advance. You keep it quiet. And you always see warfare is all about deception, like Sun Tzu said. So when you're able, you should appear to be unable. When you're unable, you should appear to be able. When you're strong, you should appear to be weak, and vice versa. So this could be another set of deceptions. We don't know what's really happening. But the Korean Peninsula is one of the dangerous flashpoints in the world. There's a number of flashpoints right now. There's the Ukraine region, the Ukraine war. That's a very dangerous flashpoint. The Korean Peninsula is a dangerous flashpoint. Taiwan is a flashpoint. India, Pakistan is a flashpoint. India, China is a flashpoint. These are some of the flashpoints in the world. And South Korea is obviously an unresolved conflict. It's a state of Cold War, active Cold War, no ceasefire. So yeah, it's dangerous, and it's certainly a region that, if not managed properly, could potentially um, lead to some kind of warfare. Yeah. McLevin says, why isn't Elon Musk trying to launch Starlink in China? If he forces Starlink in India, wouldn't it also be a threat to China? Can we use China as a proxy to fight this war? Okay. I'm sure Elon Musk must have made some kind of proposal in the past to China, and requested the Chinese leadership to allow Starlink to operate there as a token gesture, just to put it on the record. Everyone knows China will never allow Starlink to operate in their country. It's a national security threat for China to have foreign internet provider beaming in the internet straight to Chinese homes and Chinese people wherever in China. It's a national security threat. China has this great firewall, and by which they very strictly and rigorously censor the kind of information that's accessible to its population. And Starlink would completely bypass that. So it's a disastrous danger for China, and China obviously will never allow that, because they are a self-respecting sovereign nation, China, right? And the US is their greatest adversary, isn't it? So China won't allow it. Now, I'm not sure if Elon Musk has in the past requested China or not. I expect he would have at some point in time made such a request, just to put it on the record that, yeah, I did it in China as well. Now, the point is, so it won't work. It won't work. Now, the point is, what about India? He wants to offer Starlink in India. Now, we know that price-wise, Starlink doesn't make any sense to any Indian. We have some of the cheapest internet in the world, cheapest high-speed internet in the world. Okay, we in India, we are actually very fortunate as a nation that we have such high-quality internet throughout most of the country at such incredibly cheap rates. Okay, it's not being beamed to us from space, from orbit, but it's your local, the cables and all that. But it works really well. It's really high speed, high quality, and it's incredibly cheap. The price per megabyte or gigabyte, it will be like incredibly low compared to any other nation we can think of. Now, if Starlink starts operating in India, they're gonna provide you limited internet at a much more expensive rate. So most Indians won't care for it, won't buy it. Some people, like rich people, may buy it just to show off that, look, I've got Starlink. That's it. But here's the deal. And by the way, sorry, here's the deal. What was I saying? Oh, sorry, I'm not Biden. The point is, we have problems in India, right? Every nation has problems. We have problems in India. We have a very large population of foreign infiltrators who's living in India, close to maybe 100 million, Bangladeshis, Rohingyas, etc. And these elements can be leveraged by foreign powers to unleash mayhem in India, riots in such situations. Now, let's say you have a hypothetical, fictitious scenario, okay, in which you have a riot in some particular part of India, some city, some town, or whatever. What the government will immediately do is they will shut down temporarily the cellular networks, cell phone networks, and internet in that region. And then they will go out on the street, the police, and they will pacify the situation, essentially. And once things go back to normal, in a few days, the cellular network and the internet will be restarted. So that's the kind of action the government takes when there is some kind of disturbance in any part of India. Now imagine you have Starlink, which is beaming internet to all parts of India. In that case, even if the government shuts off the cellular and internet networks in the region, Starlink will keep beaming internet to that region. Of course, the government can tell Starlink, please switch off your signal to this particular region. Starlink may or may not comply. Okay? They may or may not comply. Or they may comply 24 or 48 hours too late. By which time the anti-national elements, the rioters, will get enough time to do whatever they want to do, despite there being no internet in the region from other sources. It can allow terrorists and separatists like Pakistani infiltrating in Pakistani terrorists operating in Jammu Kashmir, that region, or Kuki terrorists operating in Manipur, Mizoram, or other terrorists, whoever it is, the Naxalites in other parts of India. It will enable these people to operate with impunity, to communicate with each other despite whatever internet or cellular bans the government may put in place. That's why it's a disaster if you allow Starlink in India. And Elon Musk has gone on the record in the past. Okay, he's an agent of empire, Elon Musk. Uh, Let me go and find that particular tweet, for example. Uh, Elon Musk's tweet. Just give me a minute. I'm going to dig it out very fast as soon as I can. Starlink. There was a controversy on Twitter a few days ago. I was kind of involved in that because I expressed um, the opinion that Starlink is dangerous for India. Just give me a second. Let me pull it out as quickly as I can. Elon Musk's statement. Here you have it. Okay, let me put that on the screen. Okay, so let me put that on the screen. This is what I tweeted on the 17th of October. Today is 20, right? Here we have. So Elon Musk had tweeted this in September 2021. So it's in response to somebody. Okay, uh, so a certain naval intelligence officer, Laila Kohistani, told CNN that she would love it if SpaceX would just flood Afghanistan with Starlink, so that there's a way for us to maintain communication with our Afghan partners, which tells you that Starlink, if it is beamed to any part of the world, you can communicate over there. You don't need ground stations. Even without ground-based stations which amplify the signal, even without these stations, Starlink is accessible. It will give you a certain speed, maybe 1 or 2 Mbps, which is enough. So then, so somebody says, Scott Manley, that they need to find a friendly neighboring country who wants to help the US against Taliban so that they can deploy a downlink station. Elon Musk says our satellites launching in the next few months, 2021 September. Our satellites launching in the next few months have inter-satellite laser links, so no local downlink needed. And active in 4 to 6 months probably. That is way back in 21, so it's already active now. And then somebody else asks him, how does transmitting into a country without local downlink work on the regulatory side? Elon Musk says they can shake their fist at the sky, which means that they can't do a thing. And even if they take regulatory action and request us to stop beaming the signal, they can keep shaking their fist at the sky. We'll not stop it if we don't want to. And at some other time, Elon Musk had said that we will coup whoever we want. We will coup whoever we want. We can do a coup. He's happy for his country to do a coup in any nation that as suits the US. So my point is, this is a very dangerous thing, Starlink. And I hear that the government of India is considering allowing Starlink in India and giving them spectrum. That I think would be a disastrous step for national security. And I would like to urge the government of India to not allow Starlink in India. Okay? Don't allow Starlink in India. It will give all kinds of anti-national elements a free hand in communicating with each other. So what had I said at the time? Yeah, let me put this back on the screen. Okay, not this. I had said this just 2 or 3 days ago. Starlink, if made available in India, will pose a grave threat to national security. It will give separatists, rioters, etc. unfettered internet access, will render the government of India helpless. India should not allow Starlink in. Do you see Elon Musk asking for Starlink in China? And I'm pretty sure he must have asked at some point for Starlink in China just to put that request on the record so that they can then tell India, pay nations like India that you need to allow it in. You are a democracy, China is not. They use all these tactics against us. My point is, Starlink should not be allowed in India. Can we use China as a proxy to fight this war? How on earth do we use China as a proxy? We can't. If Starlink is allowed in India, how is it a threat to China? It is in no way, shape, or form a threat to China. It's a threat only to India, right? So yeah, that is the deal. Karan Narawat says, is iota a negative or positive number? Iota is a Greek it's a letter of the Greek alphabet. It can be whatever you want it to be. It's just a variable, right? Iota. It's just a variable. Like X is a variable or Y is a variable. Programming, if you're writing code, you can assign any value to a variable. So iota is just a letter of the Greek alphabet. And in physics, we use a lot of the Greek letters to denote various variables. In Schrödinger's equation, we use the letter psi, right? Denote the wave function. So iota can be whatever you want it to be: positive, negative, fractional, zero, whatever you want. It doesn't have any specific meaning. Om Deshmukh says, North Korea recently has sent 12,000 soldiers to Russia to fight against Ukraine. Do you think it would accelerate the war to NATO nations to send their soldiers also? Well, the West can use this as the pretext and the justification for allowing soldiers of other nationalities to fight the war against Russia in Ukraine. Yes, it can certainly happen. Why did Russia have to do this? I'm not really sure why they allowed North Korean soldiers to fight in the war. Probably the conflict is now expanding in its scope very slowly. This is the defining conflict of the first half of this century. It is the conflict that has ripped open the fissures that kind of existed and were papered over between East and West. And now we are seeing the battle lines or the sides, the confrontational sides being drawn very clearly. On the one hand, you have the US and its entire menagerie of vassals, the EU, NATO, various African nations. It neo-colonizes the AUK-US grouping, the various nations it occupies, like Japan, South Korea, etc. This entire grouping of nations is the West, let's say. So it's not a geographical entity, it's a geopolitical entity. It includes nations like South Korea and Japan, which are under US occupation since 1945 or since the 1950s in South Korea's case. So all of that is the West. That's one side. The other side is the East, which is Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, perhaps, Yemen to some extent, and certain African nations and so on. And for us, India, we are kind of in between. We're neither here or nor there, or we are kind of the bridge between East and West. And we are staying neutral as long as we can. That's the situation. So, with this as the context, maybe Russia wanted to get North Korea involved in this. North Korea, as we know, is managed by China. It is a Chinese proxy, Chinese vassal. So, it probably was done at China's behest. This sending of 12,000 or whatever number of soldiers in Ukraine, it will give them exposure to an active conflict. It always helps a military force, an armed force, to be involved in war fighting on a reasonably regular basis. Because otherwise, you're just doing war gaming and tactics and strategy on the whiteboard or whatever, and you're not actually exposed to warfare. You're not being shot at, fired at, and you're kind of rusty. So 12,000 soldiers from North Korea go and fight for a certain amount of time in Ukraine. They're going to gain a wealth of experience, tactics, strategy, battlefield, how the battlefield scenario is, and so on. and they can come back and you know propagate their learnings throughout the North Korean military. So maybe that's the reason why it was done. But yes, it can certainly serve as the justification for NATO to send soldiers of various other nations to fight the Russians in Ukraine, in case any nation volunteers to send soldiers. So yeah, it could lead to uh, a broadening of the conflict. Okay, Avinash Acharya says, is it a possibility that Indians living in Canada might be deported back to India? So that cannot happen to Indian origin Canadians who are citizens of Canada, but there's definitely a large number of Indians who are working in Canada who don't have Canadian citizenship. They may be on various kinds of visas, either student visas or work visas or whatever. And yes, the relationship right now between India and Canada is pretty bad. All thanks to one person, Justin Trudeau. Uh, and I don't think it has reached the bottom yet. I think there's more to come, and we haven't seen the worst of it yet. That's the feeling I get. Okay, so a lot has happened, right? Uh, India withdrew its ambassador and six or so of its diplomats from Canada. So we just have a bare minimum staff now at the Indian embassy in Canada. And India also expelled six Canadian diplomats, including the top six, which are the top six diplomats, including the High Commissioner, acting ambassador. So this was a pretty drastic move that India did. And then later the Western press tried to spin it and said that Canada expelled six Indian diplomats. It's not the case. That's a lie. That's complete fabrication. That's propaganda. India first withdrew the diplomats, Indian diplomats. We then expelled six Canadian diplomats. And then the Western media started spinning the story around. But that is what has happened. And there's been a lot of acrimony. The entire Canadian government has been involved from top to bottom in making statements against India, including the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau, made a deposition against Canadian Parliament or whatever it was, some kind of committee, in which he had to admit that he has no evidence that supports his claims of India doing whatever, and Indian diplomats being involved in, allegedly involved in some illegal activity or other. He has absolutely no evidence of it. He says it isn't evidence, it's intelligence. Intelligence is words, it's hearsay. It's not actionable evidence. It's not evidence that can stand scrutiny in a court of law. So he's bluffing, he's lying, he's prevaricating, he's absolutely outright lying. He's been caught lying, he's been caught red-handed. Now, things may get worse. I mean, the question we have to ask ourselves is, why have the Canadians chosen this time to do this? And what are they trying to achieve by nuking their relationship with India? India won't suffer economically, Canada will suffer economically from this. Okay? Especially if India stops doing trade with Canada. It's not going to hurt us, it's going to hurt them. It's a smaller economy. They import many important things from India, and it will affect them badly. At least it will hurt them to some extent. It won't hurt us. Now, why is Trudeau doing all this? He started this entire business about a year ago when he came to the G20 summit in Delhi, right? And he made some allegations at the time that India was involved in bumping off some ragtag third-rate terrorist, Canadian terrorist of Indian origin, a terrorist who had tried to immigrate to Canada illegally using forged documents, and he was still given his visa request was denied twice at least, but eventually he ends up getting citizenship, and he's a terrorist. He's a Canadian terrorist of Indian origin. So all that happened. Now, why now? Why suddenly all of this now? I think, look, Canada is a member of the of the Five Eyes coalition, which is the US and four of its closest vassals: the US, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. The five Anglospheric nations, English-speaking nations. Now, the Five Eyes are the closest allies of the US, the closest vassals, and It's in these five nations that most anti India elements are harbored and given refuge. A number of anti India separatists and terrorists are US citizens. A large number of these Khalistani terrorists and supporters and sympathizers and separatists are Canadian citizens. There's a significant presence of these elements in the UK and Australia as well, maybe to some extent in New Zealand as well, maybe to a smaller extent. New Zealand is very small population wise. So these nations are used by the US to prod and poke and pressurize India in a variety of ways whenever required. And it is impossible that Trudeau would take such actions without the explicit approval of his bosses in Washington, Maryland. So I think this is a pressure tactic used by the US. Uh, the US has been, ever since the Democrats came to power, the US has been after India, 2020 onwards, especially after February 22, when India refused to condemn the Russian military operation in Ukraine. And India remained neutral, and we have been buying Russian oil ever since in very large quantities. So we haven't kowtowed and pressed our forehead to the ground in front of the feet of the West. We haven't done that. We have stood straight. And that is a big problem for the West. And they tried their best to interfere in our elections in 24. And to some extent, it worked. Mr. Modi did not get a full majority. He got 240-ish, which is, he's now running a coalition government. But he still came back to power, third successive time. So the ideal scenario, see, there are multiple scenarios. The problem the US has with India is that India is a growing economy. It fulfills certain criteria. India is a large population, the largest population in the world, large land area with a tremendous amount of resources. That's number two. Number three, the fastest growing large economy in the world. Number four, we are soon going to be the third largest economy in the world. By 2050, we'll be the second largest economy in the world, 2047, 2050. And by the end of the century, we'll be the largest economy if things continue the way they are. So that's a big problem for them. They are the existing hegemon. And an existing hegemon will never allow a potential hegemon to emerge. They will nip that in the bud. So that's why they're going after India. So there's a number of ways they go after India. They have a lot of assets within India, people who are compromised. We have 100 million roughly foreign infiltrators who are living in India. They can be activated at any time they want. There is the Project Cave that's going on, Project Cookie Land for Christ, an artificial Christian nation that they want to create out of Manipur, Mizoram, parts of Bangladesh and parts of Burma. Then there is East Pakistan that has been recreated by the Americans. There are all these media outlets that they fund, NGOs that they fund, allegedly political parties that they allegedly fund, and so on. So the Americans have so many assets in the subcontinent, in the region, within India, lots of people who are working for a foreign power, and so on. There is industrial scale religious conversion happening in various parts of India. The Tirupati thing happened recently. The Tirupati temple is encircled. You look at the map, you'll see it's encircled by religious uh, buildings of other religions. So India is under siege. India's culture and civilization is under siege. They want to uproot and wipe it out. The best case scenario for them is for India and China to go to war, and they could induce such a war if they can. And the ideal situation is that India and China blow each other to bits, and nothing is left, and then America can focus fully on Russia. That's the best possible scenario in the short term. The second best possible scenario in the short term for the US is India and China again go to war somehow. India is destroyed, China is greatly weakened, and then the Americans can once again focus on Russia and take care of Russia. These are short term best case scenarios for the US. And third best case scenario is regime change in India, and then they can work on India whichever way they want. The long term end game for the US, for India, is the balkanization of India. Okay, every state becomes a separate nation. You can have a Dravidian coalition of nations in the south. That project is going on very, very strongly. Various other nations, Jammu Kashmir, they would like to secede. They would like to see various parts of Northeast India, Far East India become separate countries. Every part of India should be a separate country, ideally a non-Hindu country that they can individually control, and then they can control the destiny of these various population groups. That's what the US would like. Okay, and please understand that they have no hatred for India. It's nothing personal. It's just business, as the Godfather would say. Vito Corleone is just business. Okay, nothing personal. Don't take it personally. I have nothing against you. It's just business. So that's how it goes. That's how you play the game of geopolitics as a great power, as a superpower. So all of that is going on, and now coming back to Canada. Okay, now you understand what's happening. So Canada is a tool that they use to apply pressure on India. They want to create a certain image of India. India is a rogue state like Iran or North Korea. We send our assassins to other countries and kill innocent people. That's the kind of image they want to create. Of course, the Americans can do that. They can kill Osama bin Laden in whatever country in Pakistan. They can kill Anwar al-Awlaki in Yemen, their own citizen, and his teenage son. They can kill whoever they want, wherever they want. That's okay. They have the right to. Israel can kill whoever they want, various terrorists in various parts of the world, with impunity at will. I'm not saying Israel should not. They should. There is no place for terrorism in the world, so it's okay to do that. But India cannot touch terrorists who are after India. We don't have the right to do that. And their media will ensure that they paint India in a very horrible light. So all of that, that's what they're doing. They want to make Modi look like a dictator. They want to put him in the same league as Kim Jong Un and Putin and Xi Jinping, or maybe even worse than that. Make him look like a worst case scenario compared to these guys. And they want to make India look like an intolerant, backward uh, nation with backsliding democracy and lack of religious freedom and all that. And by creating this image, they can then justify whatever they do with India. Maybe a regime change, maybe balkanization, whatever. So that's what they're doing. And so Canada is being used for that. Now the relationship between India and Canada may get worse. And yes, uh, Justin Trudeau recently in the deposition, he said that India is he alleged that India is behind shootings and God knows what kind of crimes in Canada. So it looks like he's setting the stage for accusing random Indian origin people of being terrorists and being proxies of the RANW, especially holders of Indian passports. So it may happen. It may happen that people in India, people in Canada who are of Indian origin with Indian passports may be jailed, may be prosecuted with may have criminal cases thrown against them. And the lightest thing that could happen is deportation back to India. Something much worse may happen, which is imprisonment in Canada for God knows how long. So yeah, things are bad and things could get even worse between India and Canada. That is the situation right now. Overall, India is going to face increasing heat from the West in the coming years. It's not going to be easy for India. It's going to be very tough for the government of India, for Prime Minister Modi. The Americans, the West may try to effect regime change, as in bringing the coalition government down, perhaps by inducing certain coalition members to withdraw support or whatnot. So many things are possible. They have so many tools in their toolkit. So it's going to be a tough road ahead for India. I think it's going to be almost a miracle for this government, the Modi government, to stay in power till 2029. And yeah, India is going to face a lot of heat, a lot of pressure from the West. And let's see how things go. The Chinese are currently in the process of sweet talking India. Uh, the Chinese ambassador and the embassy in India are putting out very flattering statements every day, multiple times a day. The Global Times, which has been stridently anti-India for decades, it is putting out rather benign statements about India and so on. So the Chinese are trying to sweet talk India. So that's a whole different question and different issue. But yeah, it's part of the overall context in which we are discussing these matters. Okay. Stone says, is Israel actually an ally or friend of India? Or is it like some other Western nations vassal? Please answer this. I'll tell you something, my friends. Israel is nobody's vassal. Israel is no one's vassal. Maybe Israel has vassals, but Israel is no one's vassal. Understand that. Okay, I'll tell you that first of all. Second, what's the relationship like between India and Israel? Well, mm, reasonably good, but there are problems. Every nation, every relationship has problems. Okay, but the relationship between India and Israel is reasonably good, but it would be m- mistaken for Indians to believe that Israel is India's number one ally, or or India is Israel number one ally. What is an alliance? First of all, an alliance is something that is based on a treaty between two nations or multiple nations that you sign with very explicit clauses as to what you mean by alliance. One example of an alliance or military alliance is that if between two nations is that an attack on one nation will be considered to be an attack on both nations, and whichever nation is attacked, the other nation, the ally, is duty bound and alliance bound to come to the military aid of the nation that is attacked, whether it's nation A or nation B, both ways. That's an alliance. That's a military alliance. An economic alliance is all about economic cooperation. India and Israel have no such treaty, no such alliance. So don't use. So we have to understand that the word alliance means something very specific in geopolitics. You cannot use that word loosely or lightly. India has no treaty allies anywhere in the world. We don't have any alliance treaty with anyone, with any nation in the world. India has no allies, and India is an ally of no nation. Okay, uh, we can use terms in diplomacy like friendship and all that, and shared values and all. That's nothing. It's vague nonsense. It's vague nothingness. It means nothing. Okay, so India and Israel are not treaty allies. We don't have any alliance treaty. We have no treaty as such. So there is no alliance between the two nations. There are no friends in geopolitics. Okay, there's only national interest. If you have shared interests and a convergence of interest between two nations, then the two nations will work together. And if there is a divergence of interests, and if there is a conflict of interest, then two nations typically will be adversaries and they may go to war. So that's the situation in geopolitics. Let's be very clear about this. Okay. Now, so India and Israel have a reasonably good relationship. When it comes to voting in the United Nations, India often abstains on various resolutions, votes for resolutions either against or in favor of Israel. India often abstains from these things. Um, and India has had a very long history of supporting the Palestinian cause. And even the current government is the Modi government has reasonably good relations with uh, the Palestinian Authority or whatever it is. Okay, so India is on both sides, kind of, but the stronger relationship is clearly with Israel. Mr. Modi was the first prime minister of India to ever visit Israel, and he has a good relationship with Mr. Netanyahu. Uh, and there's a lot of military cooperation that's happening between India and Israel. The Barak missile is a jointly developed missile between the two nations, and there's some kind of past history as well. During the Kargil war, when the Americans refused to supply ammunition to India, the Israelis stepped in, that sort of thing. But we also have to remember that Israel originally wanted a great relationship with China, and the Americans stopped them from doing that. So Israel kind of pivoted towards India, because India is a huge market, and it's a huge market for Israeli exports of various kinds. Israel is a high-tech uh, nation. There is that. There's also the question of Pakistan. So that's kind of complicated, but let me put the map on the screen and explain what I mean by the question of Pakistan. Okay, where's the map? Here's the map. Now this is complicated, so pay attention, people. See, India's greatest adversary, which is clear from the map, is China. We know that. But historically, the people of India always regarded Pakistan as India's number one adversary. And Pakistan is still India's number two adversary, right? Historical enmity between India and Pakistan. And Pakistan has acted as a US proxy, and the Americans have funded and financed Pakistani terrorism in India for decades in the past. So Pakistan is one of India's great enemies. Now, Iran is is a nation that shares a border with Pakistan. The old India-Iran border is now the Pakistan-Iran border. And Iran is a Shia nation, Pakistan is a Sunni nation, Pakistan is a US vassal, Iran is a US enemy, which means Iran and Pakistan can never be on good terms. Iran and Pakistan are adversaries, stated or unstated, but they are adversaries. And recently we had certain tensions on the border and the killing of terrorists and shooting of missiles and all the firing of missiles and so on, so on, so forth. So Pakistan and Iran are enemies, okay? Now, do you know that my enemy's enemy is my friend? You must have heard of it. Who is Iran's number one enemy in the region? Israel. So Iran's enemy is Israel, Iran's enemy is Pakistan. So Pakistan and Israel should be on the same side, right? So the question for Israel to answer is, where does Israel stand vis-a-vis Pakistan? Because Pakistan is a US vassal in the region. And Israel's number one supporter is the US. So it makes sense from the logic of strategy that Israel, Pakistan, and the US are in the same camp. Correct? So then the question to and you know, Pakistan and Israel don't have official diplomatic relations, but we know that there have been back channel contacts, ongoing contacts between the two nations. The question is, where does Israel stand on the issue of Pakistan? And then there is the other question, okay, which is this. Let me put this on the screen now. Now, does Israel recognize the territorial integrity of India? Now, if you look at Israel's official maps, they look like this. I mean, this is a tweet by me from October 3 this year, which is about 2.5 weeks ago. So this is a map that an Israeli website had. Here's the link over here, and in which they show Kashmir, POK, all of that as part of Pakistan, and Aksai Chin as part of China. And I tweeted this: India stands with Israel, but does Israel stand with India? And I pointed out the incorrect map of India. And soon enough, the ambassador of Israel responded to this the next day morning. He said that it's a mistake by the editor of the website, and the map has been taken down. So let's take a look at the map. Is it taken down? 1 second. Okay, so if you open that screen, that particular link, it shows it's a broken page in the construction, whatever it means in Hebrew. I don't know how to read that. So, and it's not the only incorrect map of India that you will see on Israeli websites. I just pointed out one link. I can assure you there are more, and those may still exist. You may want to look into it. So the point is this: we have a good relationship with Israel. It works both ways, okay? And the people of Israel, if you see the polls, opinion polls and all, they seem to have a reasonably favorable impression of India, many of them. And in India, people are crazy about Israel. There are people in India who put up Israeli flags on their social media profiles, right? So most Indian nationalists and patriots worship Israel, like hero worship. Most Israelis are kind of ambivalent or slightly warm towards India. So it's an unequal relationship. Now, my perspective is very clear. The only flag you should have on your profile is your own. I would never put any other nation's flag on my profile, but it's up to you. Indians are very emotional people, and Indians don't have a lot of. We're not taught how to think critically, right? So there is that. So the relationship is good. It isn't perfect. Both nations could do better towards each other. There are question marks when it comes to Israel about certain matters. For example, there is the ongoing Kuki terrorism in Manipur. There is a subset of the Kuki population that has become Israeli citizens. They claim that they are a lost tribe of Israel, even though they eat pork. And the Israeli government has given them citizenship. And there has been support for the Kuki terrorism in Manipur coming in from certain segments or sub-segments of the Israeli population, maybe the Kuki origin individuals. But is it only limited to that, or is there something bigger within Israel? So these questions, I think the government of India needs to take them up with Israel, or the government of India needs to look into. So I would say there are no friends in geopolitics. Overall, the relationship between India and Israel is very good. The problem in India is that the people of India are starved of role models. We are starved of real heroes. We have no real heroes. We have no real role models to look up to and hero worship. So we look outside the country. Tell me, which great politician in the past 100 years do you feel is worthy of reverence and hero worship? Maybe Netaji. Anybody else you can think of? Anybody today? You can't think of any. Can you think of any great thing India has done, the kind of thing Israel has done in the recent past? Taking out the whole of the Hamas leadership, wiping out so many Hamas terrorists with pagers, the kind of things, the audacious things they do. India never does that. So Indians want to be proud of something. They want to see somebody as a hero. And there's nothing within India that's worthy of being a hero. So what do Indians do? They'll hero worship certain Bollywood actors who will play certain heroic roles, and they will think that actor himself is that heroic, even though he's just acting. Or they will hero worship certain sporting athletes as if they are gods. They're not. Or they will hero worship other nations like Israel. My simple point is, I understand why you feel this way, but please be pragmatic. Please think critically. The only ally your nation has is you. India has no allies outside of India. Nobody's going to come to help India if something goes wrong. No one's going to stand with India. Full support, sir. Nobody's going to say that to us. We are on our own. So overall, the relationship between India and Israel is good, but there are issues. Okay, there are issues. Cinephile talks about cricket. Is Dale Steyn the greatest test bowler ever, considering his record not only on bouncing and sieving conditions, but also in the subcontinent? I remember his havoc in Nagpur 2010. I would say he's one of the best of all time. Let me see. Okay, let's Google this. I'm sure we can find it somewhere. Where's Google? Okay, let's see the highest wicket takers test cricket. Okay, so it's gonna give you this crick info thing. Now let's take a look at the test record of Dale Steyn. So he's played 93 test matches. He's got 439 wickets. That's a lot. The average is less than 23, and the strike rate is shocking. It's 42. Incredible. If you look at the top, whatever 20 plus, there's nobody with that sort of a strike rate. 42.38. And the next one is Wakar Yunis, who is all the way down here with 43.5. So when it comes to strike rates, Dale Steyn is in a class, in a league of his own. Very low average. And if he did not have all those injuries, he would have had way more wickets. Now look at Ashwin. I think Ashwin is one of the all-time greats. So I would say Dale Steyn is definitely one of the greatest ever. In terms of strike rates, he's one of the most devastating, probably the most devastating bowler in the top 20 wicket takers in the world. So clearly one of the greatest all-time greats. But personally, my favorite, the one I thought was the greatest, was Curtly Ambrose. In his peak, he was unplayable. And if you look at, let's take a look at Ambrose. Where is Curtly Ambrose? He's going to be somewhere around here. 400 plus, I'm sure he had. There we have it. Average of 20.9. Good God. Okay, strike rate wasn't that good because later the West Indies pitches became like Indian pitches. But yeah, Ambrose was incredible. When it comes to the average, there's nobody who comes close to him apart from Glenn McGrath. So yeah, my favorite back in the day was Ambrose. I wish I had an Indian player who I could have idolized, but there was no great Indian fast bowler. Kapil Dev was a fast medium bowler at best. Great bowler for sure, but not that quick. Until Srinath, there was no one I could see who could really hurt the opposition. But Srinath was a very, very gentlemanly player, a very good guy. So yeah, Steyn, one of the greatest ever for sure. Okay, we have dealt with Starlink. Now let's take this. Kanan Bakaria says, France is helping India with 100% transfer of technology for jet engines and development of nuclear attack submarines. Is it a significant blow for the US? Can this development prompt the US to act against India in the Canadian scenario? Look, France says France has offered 100% transfer of technology for jet engines and so on. The devil is always in the details. Okay, there's always going to be some clause somewhere that says that okay, this 0.1% technology will. There's always going to be some fine print. Okay, it's almost unthinkable that a nation would give up its hard earned technology. It takes so long to develop technology, they would give it up so easily. They, of course, France has a big axe to grind against the US. Okay, France hates being part of NATO. France hates being part of the EU, or at least part of NATO, because you are under US domination. France is the only nation in Europe that still has some kind of a quasi-independent foreign policy. They have their own independent nuclear deterrent, like nobody that no one else in Europe does. The UK doesn't have an independent nuclear deterrent. Okay, the big red button isn't there in London; it's in Washington DC. The button which um, is connected to the British missiles. Those missiles are American missiles, by the way. So France is the only nation with somewhat of an indifferent foreign policy. Now, the Americans have, let's say, shafted France multiple times. The Australians were supposed to buy French submarines. The Americans forced the Australians to kill the deal and buy American submarines that will be delivered in what, 2087 or something, 2030s, 2040s, 10, 20 years from now. So that has really angered the French, clearly, no doubt. So the French would certainly want to work together with India and do something that displeases the Americans. And of course, if it helps the French financially, why not? Why not do that? So I'm sure India will be willing to pay good money for this technology. The question is, will we get the full technology, full 100% TOT? I think we're going to have to be very careful that we are not we don't end up with 98% technology, and that will be like crippling. Okay, even that 2%, if you don't have it can cripple you, and it can render you completely dependent on a foreign power. There is that. So the jet engine is a critical piece of technology for India. We anyhow need jet engine technology. I don't care how we get it. We buy, beg, borrow, or steal it. We need that jet engine technology. Without this jet engine technology, our Tejas fighter program is useless. Right now, we are having to buy American jet engines, and now they're trying to delay that. The Americans are trying to put pressure on India by delaying the delivery of jet engines. So we may have the airframe, everything, but no engines, and what the hell do you do with it, right? So it would be great for us to get this technology, 100% TOT, but that may take a decade or two. Who knows, if we negotiate properly and we ensure everything comes our way. But yeah, that's where we are. Or we could develop our own cavalry jet engine. The cavalry jet engine is kind of underpowered, but it does work. So why doesn't India develop a fighter plane design with two engines instead of one, and put two cavalry engines? The question is, how long do those engines last and all that? But yeah, if it is giving you a 70 kilonewton kind of output thrust, then put two, so you have 140 kilonewtons, and that's good enough for a fighter plane. I think the Rafale has that sort of configuration, two jet engines. So that can be a stopgap measure, but ideally we would want to develop our own homegrown jet engine. That can take time, 10, 20, 30 years. So so the indigenous jet engine development cannot stop. We have to keep on pushing forward with that. In the meanwhile, we, if possible, get the French technology. That would be great. Nuclear attack submarines, we'll see about that. The main, once again, it's about the propulsion, right? Jet engines is propulsion. Nuclear, the miniaturized nuclear reactor in a submarine, that's also propulsion. It's all about propulsion. So the Russians, and they've been cooperating with us in miniaturizing nuclear reactors, and we are using that in a couple of our submarines, the Arihant and the Arighat, or whichever the second one is. So the Arihant has been operational for some time, and we have a newer one now that recently became operational, which is more powerful than the Arihant. And each successive iteration will be better in some way. So we are kind of testing our way, iterating our way to better technology when it comes to submarines, nuclear submarines. Now, the French offer us good technology. We should go for it as long as once again, it's 100% transfer of technology. So if all of this goes through, the jet engine technology transfer, the nuclear submarine technology transfer, if all of that does indeed go through properly 100%, it's something that will greatly displease the US. And if we are making moves in that direction along with the French, excuse me, then yes, the Americans will be tempted to maybe punish India and France in some way, whether it's through Canada or through separatism or cookie land for Christ, or religious conversions, or farmers' protests, or some other protests, or whatever. Or what's happening these days? Dozens of bomb threats against Air India planes. Okay, somebody is orchestrating this worldwide. Who, I guess? Who do you think is doing this? I wonder. I will not venture a guess because I have no information. But from the pattern and from the current context and scenario, who do you think is behind this? Do you think it's some stupid teenagers from within India who are making prank calls? You can spoof a call from within India from anywhere in the world. So I think there's a concerted effort going on to put India under pressure. So yeah, if India and France go ahead with this, I think both nations could be punished in a variety of ways. Mohammed Ismail says, could you discuss the German Tiger tanks used during World War II, their effectiveness, and whether they can be compared in any meaningful way to Indian tanks? Okay, that's an interesting question. I am no expert in tank warfare and the various tanks. We had the Panzer tanks that the Germans developed, very good tank. They were used in the North African campaign. Erwin Rommel was the commander of that. And you had the Tiger tanks. And the Tigers were really good, I believe. But as per the specifications and how they compare with current tanks and previous tanks, I am not sure I'm the right person for that. I have not studied this in detail. But the Tigers were very effective. Very effective. I mean, there's a whole song by Pink Floyd, When the Tigers Broke Free. It's about Roger Waters and what his father went through. He was part of the Royal Fusiliers Company 3, and he was at the Battle of the Anzio Bridgehead when the Tigers broke free, and they took his life. Yeah, so the Tigers were very effective, but I am not sure I'm the right person to ask this. How do you compare their characteristics and specifications with the current crop of tanks that we have? Yeah, but interesting question, definitely. Okay, Siddharth Singh Raut Purohit says, who could possibly win a fight between Anderson Silva and John Jones? Considering both of them are in the prime. Anderson Silva, was he a light heavyweight, was he? John Jones used to be light heavyweight, now he's a proper heavyweight. He bulked up for 2 or 3 years, and he fought a couple of matches, and then he got injured, and he's on the way to recovery, I believe now. Anderson Silva used to be a light heavyweight, or was it middleweight? I think light heavyweight. Israel Adesanya was in which weight class? I think middleweight. Okay, whichever weight class it is. Assume both are in the same weight class. Who would win? It's pretty difficult. John Jones was a stone cold killer as a fighter. He defeated almost everybody, if I'm not mistaken. I think he's got an almost unblemished track record. And John Jones and Silva in his prime could not be taken out by anybody, unless he got too overconfident, which may have happened at least once. So who would win? Difficult question. Perhaps. Yeah, that's. I think it would be like 50-50. Perhaps Silva may win. Perhaps. But yeah, it's a hypothetical, like What would happen? What would have happened if India had never been colonized? That sort of question. But I think Silva would probably win. He was really wily. Yeah. McLevin says, "Have you read Mein Kampf? Is it worth reading? Which publisher has the best version?" I At some point in my life I had a copy of Mein Kampf, and that's I tried reading it about 20 years ago. I may have gone through maybe a chapter or so, and at that point in time it made no sense to me. I could not comprehend what he was trying to say, and I gave up, and I gave that book away to someone or something like that. Maybe it may perhaps be more comprehensible today, perhaps. I'm guessing. So I've tried reading it a long time ago. I gave up on it, but it may perhaps have a different kind of effect this time over if I ever try to read it again. I'm not sure which publisher has the best version. I'm not sure if it's even available anymore in India. I'm sure you can go out in the on the streets and find a used version or a pirated version, but I don't think it's available on Amazon or whatever, as far as I can recall. Yeah, so I don't know which publisher is the best version, but I'm sure it's an interesting piece of historical literature to kind of give you an insight into the minds of one of the major historical figures of the first half of the 20th century. Certainly interesting from an academic perspective. Uh, Geopolitical Dubey says, which nation is more important geographically, Bharat or Russia? Well, to answer that question, we'll have to take a look at the map, right? So here's the deal. And by the way, I'm not Joe Biden. So first, let's take a look at Bharat. Bharat is located in the southern region of Eurasia. Okay. And Bharat dominates the entire Indian Ocean region. It goes all the way deep, almost close to the equator, all the way into the Indian Ocean, and it dominates the region. And so that gives it a tremendous, an almost God-gifted geographical location. Okay, and it is a very large nation, and because it has such a large land area, you will have a tremendous amount of natural resources that you will find within this land area. Whether you know it or not, whether you have searched for them or not, you may have it. You will have it. Lithium and coal and gas and petroleum and diamonds and things that I am saying that you may not even know. Okay? I mean, petroleum, do we really have much petroleum in India? I think we have not looked for it enough. I think if you go offshore of the coast of India, you may find more petroleum that you have in the Arabian region, but maybe it's a good idea we're not doing it right now. Haha. So, yeah, geographically, a great location. Now, if we look at Russia, Russia is enormous, gigantic. Uh, and it goes all the way to Alaska. I mean, the Diomede Islands, they connect they are the border between the US and Russia. The small Diomede Island over here, that's USA. The big one is Russia, right? So Russia is enormous. And that obviously gives it a tremendous geographical advantage. I would say the nation that is more important geographically is the nation that has the larger land area and the larger amount of resources, and that is clearly Russia. Russia has unlimited oil, gas, coal, various metals, uh, whatever you want. Russia is an autarky. Everything that you need to run a country is available. All those resources, raw materials are available within Russia itself. It doesn't need to import anything. It is a net exporter of everything. When it comes to India, we have to import a lot of things, right? So Russia is more important geographically. But the problem with Russia is that it is all the way north in Eurasia, and it is kind of cut off from the warm oceans of the world. It has access to the Arctic Ocean, the Kara Sea, the Barents Sea, the Sea of Okhotsk, and the Baltic Sea and the Baltic Sea. Yeah, and there are all these choke points that kind of cut off Russia's access to the open oceans, whether it is the Sea of Japan, the Sea of Okhotsk, the Barents Sea, or wherever, the Baltic Sea, wherever. That's a problem. So its one Achilles heel is its lack of access to warm waters and a lack of warm water ports. But apart from that, Russia has an incredible geography, and it is gifted in terms of resources. It's complete autarky. So overall, its advantage. Russia in India has certain disadvantages in terms of resource availability. Okay. Advait says, why do some Indian experts, in quotes, consider it wrong for India to be ally-less? Even some of the retired Indian military personnel, a civilization that truly wants to rise will never have any allies. Okay, so why do some experts think of it that way? Look, I have the highest regard for military personnel, but military personnel, they have one characteristic, and that is they look at everything in the world from the military perspective, tactics and strategy. People with a military background are tremendously good at tactics and strategy. They will look at the geography, they will look at the map, they will look at the topographical map of the region, geographical terrain, they will see all the various topographical features, and they can tell you what tactics to use in this region, in this terrain, what strategy to use over a larger terrain, and so on. What they lack is, what most of them lack, I would say, is the deep understanding of history and culture. For example, if you ask a military personnel about Manipur, and let's say they've served in Manipur for 2 years, okay? They will talk about the terrain, the geography, the jungles, the kind of uh, insurgents you meet there, how ferocious they are and how evil they are and all that. But they will typically not know the deep history of the region and why these conflicts happened. And who are the real outsiders, who are the real indigenous people, they will not know this. Many of them, I'm not saying all. So that's a problem. So if you want to understand tactics, strategy, battle options, all of that, military strengths and weaknesses, all of that, military personnel are the best to give you insights in that. But when it comes to understanding geopolitics, I would have to respectably say that military personnel are generally not the best at giving you the right perspective when it comes to this. But in India, podcasters and news channels, they will invite military personnel to talk about geopolitics. It's a shortcut. It's a shortcut. The right kind of person you want to call or invite to explain geopolitics is a person who has served in the military and is also a historian. Will you find such people? You typically won't. I have once found such a person. His name is Dr. Edward Luttwak. He has served in war. He has seen action in battles, and he's a historian. He's a strategist, Dr. Edward Luttwak. And you will see my podcast with him on the Abhijit Chavda podcast episode. I don't remember which one, first 20, 25 episodes. It's somewhere in there. So that's the kind of person who can give you a proper perspective, which combines history, culture, and military matters. So retired army personnel, I don't know what calculations go on in their minds. They look at things from a very military perspective, and from a military perspective, when you are involved in a military operation, you need multiple companies, and you need an air component, you need a satellite component, you need communications, you need logistics, you need multiple detachments, platoons, tanks, infantry, all that. So they see that as allies, perhaps. That's why they think that in international relations, a nation like India should have multiple allies. Perhaps they see it that way. Perhaps I'm just speculating to a certain extent. Now, historically, think about the last 2000 years of history. The great civilizations and empires that emerged in the last 2,000-3,000 years of history, how many allies did they have? Think about the Mauryan Empire. Did we have allies? Yeah, we did. We had one ally, the Seleucid Empire, Seleucus Nicator. So, yeah. So that was not really an alliance, it was a ceasefire. The Seleucid Empire, the Seleucus Nicator tried to invade India. Probably it was a way of saying, hi, that I need some help. But there was a brief war, and then there was a ceasefire, and then there was a marriage alliance. and there was peace after that. But it was not a military alliance; it was an alliance of peace. Okay, it was a ceasefire alliance, and because the two royal families became commingled because of marriage, so that can be regarded as kind of an alliance. But it was not a military alliance at all. So the Mauryan Empire, we did not have any military alliance. The Gupta Empire, no military alliance with anybody. The Chola Empire, we did not have a single military alliance with anybody else. We had vassals. Oh, yes. The Cholas had vassals all the way to the Philippines. So we had vassals, we did not have allies. The Guptas had vassals, yes, no allies. The Mauryans had vassals, no allies. And so on. You can go on. When it comes to other empires, the Persian empires, the Achaemenid or Achaemenish Empire, they exclusively fought westwards with the Greeks. Did they have allies? They had no allies. The Roman Empire, did they have allies? They had zero allies, they only had vassals. The British Empire, did they have allies? No, they had vassals and colonies. Until, okay, you're gonna give me the example of World War One and World War Two. That was a totally different period of history, which was the decline and eventual dissolution of the British Empire or the transfer of power to Washington. That is a different story. But when you talk about the rise of the British Empire in its pinnacle, in its zenith, it had no allies. It had only vassals. The U.S. Empire today, they say they have allies, but those that term ally that they use it for vassals. So, if you want to rise and be great, you will never have allies. You will have enemies, and if you get your act together, you will have vassals. And then you can use whatever language you want to describe those vassals. You can call them allies if you want, but they're actually vassals. So you are right, I agree. A civilization that wants to rise again will never have allies. It will have enemies. But once it starts winning, it's going to have vassals. So what India needs desperately is to put a few wins in its belt. We need to start winning something. I'm not saying go and capture this country, conquer the territory. We need wins, big achievements. Space station in orbit around the Earth, moon landing, moon colony, Mars colony, or 50 nuclear submarines, or something of that sort, without actually going to war, or maybe a positive development west of India in the temporary nation and so on, or a positive development vis-a-vis China and Tibet. I mean, lots of different ways of winning. Or hosting the Olympics and winning 30 gold medals. That's a win. India needs to start winning. But the point is, as a civilization, if you want to rise again, and historically we have been number one, historically that the past 10,000 years, the past 1,000 years has been an aberration. So you want to rise again, you will not have any allies. You will have everybody standing up against you and trying to stop you from rising. You're going to have enemies. And that's what we are facing now. We're finally kind of rising. That's why everyone's against us. We don't have any allies. And it's fine to not have any allies. Why do we need allies? We are 1.4 billion of us. Why do we need allies? Don't we have each other? Isn't 1.4 billion people enough? We have each other. That's enough for us. We don't need allies. We need to get our act together, raise our standards, and start winning. That's what we need. Okay. Star Lord says, what do you think about Graham Hancock and his lost civilization theory? And what do you think about the younger Dryas impact theory? Okay, Graham Hancock is interesting guy. He says everything goes back to an ancient civilization. Only one ancient civilization that was the root of everything else that happened that exists in the world today. That's the claim he makes. And there was this documentary series that he put out on Netflix recently. About a year or so ago, I actually spent the time and saw every single episode. So he goes to various archaeological sites and locations across the world, in the Atlantic Ocean, in South America, Mexico, Indonesia, or somewhere he also goes, and various other parts in Malta, in Anatolia, Göbekli Tepe, and so on. He goes to all of these ancient archaeological sites, and it tries to create to weave these stories together and say that all of these were there was an older ancient civilization that was the originator of all of this, and it tries to point out similarities between all these things, but he conspicuously avoids India. Okay, he conspicuously avoids India. We have some of the oldest archaeological sites in the world in India. For example, over here in the Gulf of Khambat, Khambat, the town of Khambat used to be a major port, and this region is called the Gulf of Khambat. Over here, you have an underwater complex of cities. It is not one archaeological site, it is not one town, it is not one city. There's an entire complex of cities that lies under and at the bottom of the Gulf of Khambat. And the last time it was above the ocean was more than 12,000 years ago, during the last ice age. So our ancestors, I mean, it was obviously not aliens or Martians or Turks or Persians who had come here. This was the subcontinent. It was our people, our ancestors who built this. A complex of cities with streets laid out in a grid structure that goes back 10, 12,000 years before today. Okay? Older than Göbekli Tepe and whatnot. But Graham Hancock will stay away from that. Dwarka. Dwarka, a piece of wood from the underwater city of Dwarka, has been dated to almost 9,000 years before today. So in southern India, near Puducherry, they discovered an ancient submerged city that could be Kaveri Pumpattinam of the Sangam era that goes back 11,000, 12,000 years. So we have some of the most ancient archaeological sites known anywhere in the world that are available, that are present in and around India. But Graham Hancock deliberately, conspicuously stays away from this, and he tries to go everywhere else in the world. He has some issue. He has some problem with India. Okay? And when you have a scholar, a researcher who is deliberately omitting a big, giant piece of the puzzle, then you can't take that person seriously. You can't respect that person. If you want to prove a certain thesis, take the entirety of the data into account and picture. But he's leaving out a big chunk. He's leaving out the most ancient civilization known to humanity. So once you see that, it's clear the guy has some kind of agenda. He's cherry picking data, and then you kind of lose respect for the person and you lose interest in what he's doing. So I think the guy is not a serious scholar. A serious scholar will take everything into account, irrespective of personal likes, dislikes, biases, racism, whatever, if whether it's there or not. Okay, so I don't take the guy very seriously, and he makes lots of big leaps of imagination, and he reaches conclusions that don't really have a sound logical background to them. So some of his stuff is interesting, some of it is in the realm of nutcase behavior. But yes, his younger dryas theory has been vindicated mostly. Recently, an impact crater was discovered somewhere in Alaska or Greenland, I think, under a thick layer of ice, and that dates back about 11 point something thousand years before today, which is kind of this anomalous event, the younger dryas event. So it looks like there was some kind of extraterrestrial impact that happened on the planet. A comet, meteorite, not meteorite, that could have interrupted the ice age and brought in warmer weather for about 1,000 years or something, roughly. So the younger dryas impact theory seems to make sense. It seems that there was an impact on Earth, maybe a comet that broke up and fragmented and hit the Earth in multiple pieces, or maybe multiple meteorites that hit the Earth. But it looks like that theory could be correct. So yeah, that's about it. Toji says, what is your favorite song by Guns N' Roses? Oh, Guns N' Roses. I wish they were still active. They had lots of good songs. What, November Rain, and their cover or their version of the Bob Dylan classic, Knocking on Heaven's Door. What else? Don't Cry. Illusion, thing. Use Your Illusion or something. They had a number of great songs. I think one of the last great rock bands you had. Axl Rose had this incredibly iconic voice that nobody else could recreate. Um, yeah, so and it's a band that was at its peak when I was a young, I mean, teenager or something. So yeah, it was kind of my part of my teen years, and I kind of miss the days, when you had good music. Today, music is just generic, canned garbage. It's nothing original about it, unless you go to indie music and all. But for that, you have to really dig deep. So yeah, Guns N' Roses. Buffalo Soldier says, "Thank you. Been thinking about this for a while. Why the hell would he not have a single episode dedicated to India?" Yeah, Graham Hancock doesn't make sense. He's deliberately omitted uh, covering the world's most ancient civilization, which has some of the oldest archaeological sites in the world. Clearly, a guy with an agenda. Clearly, a guy who is not a serious scholar. It's like these Western scholars who try to cherry pick their way into the Aryan invasion, migration, tourism, picnic myth. Right? Same sort of thing. Guy with a you can't take such a guy seriously. Okay. um Pronil says, "Have you seen the Sindhu Saraswati script decryption? It's fantastic." Are you talking about the one by Yajnadevam? Yes, Yajnadevam has decrypted, deciphered the Sindhu Saraswati script, the so-called Harappan or Indus Valley script, uh, and I'm gonna be bringing you the details of that in a couple of months. Yeah, so it's a great it's a great development. We finally have the decipherment of the Sindhu Saraswati script, and the language happens to be Sanskrit. Unfortunately, for those who have an agenda. Karan Nalawat says, "Why did the Nobel Prize in Physics? Why was it given to AI researchers?" Yeah, who knows? You can't take the Nobel Prize seriously anymore. The next thing is they will give the Fields Medal to somebody who writes poetry, because mathematics clearly is a branch of literature, right? It's a language of physics. I mean, it really doesn't have any meaning anymore. All these prizes. There was a time when the Nobel Prize meant something, and you really looked forward to it eagerly, whichever discipline it was: physics, chemistry. Uh, what else do we have? I didn't ever care about the Peace Prize. It was always a fraud thing. But mathematics and chemistry, you would look forward to it. The economics prize sometimes was interesting, but these days, there's an increasing gap between the time when the research is done and when the prize is given. It used to be usually, in the beginning, in the first quarter of the 20th century, when all the progress in quantum mechanics and relativity was being done, there was typically a gap of 5 or 6 years between the discovery and the prize, maybe 10 years at most. Today it's like 30, 35, 40 years before you get a prize. So Peter Higgs came up with the Higgs mechanism in the 1950s or 60s, and he got the prize just a few years ago, like more than half a century later. It's ridiculous. Makes no sense. If someone's doing great work, reward them immediately, right? Or within a reasonable amount of time. And now you're not even giving the prize to physicists. You're giving it to AI researchers. It's pointless. I mean, it just makes you. It's like the Grammys now. No one cares about the Grammys. No one cares about the Oscars anymore. The same thing you're gonna see very soon when it comes to the Nobel Prize. No one cares anymore. So it's overall a symptom of the decline of the West, the declining standards of the West. Eh, sad to see. Sad to see that. Okay. What else do we have? Okay, Prasanna Gadve says, "Why has Russia failed in Ukraine? As Russia has not succeeded in doing in achieving what it wanted to achieve. Why Xi Jinping told his army to be ready for war?" Okay, one question at a time. Let's talk about Russia. Um, have you heard of the Peloponnesian War? The Peloponnesian War was a massive geopolitical conflict that tore apart the Greek islands. The Greek islands. This happened in roughly 2,500 years before today, roughly 2,500 years before today. The Peloponnesian War. It was essentially a war between Athens and Sparta. And the Greek historian Thucydides chronicled the war. He wrote a very important account of the Peloponnesian War. Now, this war, it lasted more than 3 decades. So let's say it starts in year X, okay, in year X, and 2 years after the war, or 3 years after the start of the war, you could say, why has Athens not succeeded in doing what it wants, or why has Sparta not succeeded in achieving its objectives? And it would be a valid question. And the achievement of the objectives and the conclusion of the war was going to happen 30 years down the line. So it doesn't mean that in year 3 either side has failed or succeeded. Some wars last a week, some wars last a year, some wars last 30 years, 40 years. So if a war lasts 40 years, you can't look at year 3 and say that why has so and so side failed. Okay, it all depends on a number of factors: the geography, the technology, the relative strength of both sides, the overall large scale big picture geopolitical environment, so many factors. So this assumption that you are putting forth, the statement that you are making that Russia has failed, I don't agree with it. In the beginning of this today's episode, somebody asked me a different question. I said currently it's a frozen conflict, but Russia has the upper hand. Russia clearly has the upper hand. Of course, if you read the Western media and also the Indian media, you will come to the opposite conclusion. I don't blame you for that, but it is, I mean, how much Ukrainian territory does Russia hold? About 20%, 25% of Ukraine is under Russian possession right now. You think Russia is failing? Really? So you have to look at things objectively. You have to reach your own conclusions. You cannot parrot other people's conclusions. That's called dogmatic thinking. That you use the results of other people's thinking and you think it's your own thinking. No, that's not how it works. Please learn critical thinking. Ask question after question after question. What is Russia's objective? What is Ukraine's objective? Who is supporting Ukraine? Who is supporting Russia? Is Ukraine acting on its own, or is Ukraine someone's proxy? If it is somebody's proxy, whose proxy is it? And what does that big power want? And what does Russia want? And what has Russia achieved thus far? What has Ukraine achieved thus far? Which side has suffered more losses? Which side has more arms, ammunition? Which side has the more territorial gains? Which side has lost territory? If you put all of these things together, ask question after question, multiple questions, a string of questions, then you will come and uncover the truth. And the truth is that Russia has the upper hand and Russia is going to win this war. How can you say Russia has failed? Just because they have not achieved certain objectives as of today doesn't mean they have failed. When I start running a marathon, which is 35 kilometers, after if I am at number, if I am in the 20th position after 5 kilometers, you cannot say that I failed. You understand? So please analyze things dispassionately, analyze things using your own intellect, not using the conclusions presented by your favorite newscaster or news anchor, news reader, or podcaster, or favorite media outlet, whichever it is. Use your own thinking, question them all, assume they are all wrong, and try to look at flaws in their arguments and conclusions. That's how you learn how to think critically. Without the ability to think critically, you will not succeed anywhere in life. Please understand this. So Russia and Ukraine are currently involved in a frozen conflict. It's a long war scenario. It reminds me of certain wars, like the Peloponnesian War. I gave you the example of it. It lasted decades. But eventually, what happened, happened. Athens fell. Sparta won. But then Yeah, so that was the conclusion of the conflict, but then lots of other things happened. At Athens, a century later, Athens was there again. So that's how it goes. Um, what else do we have? Lots of questions. Okay, let's see this one. SP Joker says, can Russia again become a great power and successfully compete with China militarily if it changes its constitution, builds military, and the USA withdraws? Do you understand how much of a tall order this is? Changing its constitution, US military withdrawal. The US has more than 130 permanent military bases on Japanese soil. Do you think they will withdraw from that? If you are the world's most powerful nation and you have invested and built 130 military bases, permanent bases on another nation's territory, will you just give it up? Will you just pack up and walk away? Of course you will not. Of course you will not. The Americans will never willingly withdraw from Japan. They would be stupid to withdraw. Why would they withdraw? Why would you give up an advantage? And why will they allow Japan to change its constitution? Why? The constitution that they wrote for Japan, it serves them. Why would they give up that advantage? It's never gonna happen as long as the US is the number one power in the world. Never. So the Americans will allow Japan to build a powerful military if it suits them. They will allow Japan to become even a nuclear weapons power if it suits them. But all of this will be used only for America's benefit. Japan can never become a great power again as long as it is under foreign military occupation. So I don't see it becoming a great power in a 50-year horizon. I hope I'm wrong, but yeah. Okay. Martian Gamer says update on ISRO's new plan they rolled out and also about their new NGLV. What new plan have they rolled out? I seem to be unaware of it. I mean, are they planning to develop reusable rockets? No. Are they planning to uh, develop a rocket that is 10 times more powerful than the most powerful rocket they have? No. Are they planning to have a moon mission, human crewed mission to the moon anytime soon? No. Are they thinking about sending a rocket to Mars? I think Mangalyaan 2 will happen sometime. There's nothing major coming up. It's all small incremental changes. And the government has said certain things that we will have a space station in orbit around the Earth by the 2030s. Yeah, great. Wonderful. And we're going to have humans on the moon by 2040. Okay, good talk. All words thus far. I am not trying to be cynical here. I hate cynicism. But I don't see any ambition when it comes to the government of India for ISRO. See, ISRO is a government entity. They can only carry out projects that are sanctioned by the government of India. Let's say you have a bunch of brilliant engineers in ISRO. They all are brilliant, very competent. And some of them have certain ideas of developing some new technology. Or let's say just copying what the SpaceX engineers have done. Reusable rockets, rockets whose boosters land autonomously. They may know how to do it. They may have an idea as to how to achieve this. They may even put forth a proposal to the chairman of ISRO. And the chairman of ISRO may even take that proposal to the government of India. But does the government of India want this to happen? No. Do you see any sign, symptom, evidence of the government of India showing any kind of ambition that ISRO should develop technology that others have not developed? No. We are simply copying what others have done before. We're simply following their footsteps. So I don't know what big new plan is there. Okay, I don't see anything exciting, anything it's challenging, or space is challenging for sure. So we're gonna have Chandrayaan 4, Chandrayaan 5, or whatever. Eventually, by the 2040s, if we are lucky, we may have a human mission to the moon. We're gonna have excuse me, Gaganyaan in the next 2-3 years, the first human orbital flight. with Indian astronauts. Great. I'm happy to hear that. But we are doing what others have done a long, long time ago. 1950s, we're talking about, right? So that's the problem. We have very talented engineers in ISRO. And the chairman of ISRO says that we have enough budget. ISRO has enough funds to properly carry out all the projects it is allowed to do, all the projects that have been sanctioned. But what about the projects that should be sanctioned are not being sanctioned? And even the projects that are sanctioned, we have shoestring budgets. I mean, a Hollywood movie costs more than the budget of Chandrayaan or Mangalyaan, right? That's how little ISRO is, the kind of budget ISRO is getting. So I don't know what new plan has been rolled out. I don't know. What is NGLV? What is NG? Let me Google that. What is NGLV? What does NGLV mean? Let us see. Okay, ISRO NGLV. ISRO NGLV. What's it mean? Next generation launch vehicle. Let's see what Wikipedia has to say. Statutory warning: Wikipedia is not always reliable. So three-stage partial blah 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 blah. Vehicle will replace PSLV, GSLV, LMV3. So LMV3, what is the maximum thrust? All that it has. Let me see. Specification: propellant, inertial mass, blah blah, etc. Maximum thrust 5150 kilonewtons. What is LEO mass? Launch mass is this. Second stage, third stage. Excuse me. Or what is the payload it can take to? What is the payload? Payload, maximum thrust, propellant mass, gross mass, empty mass, height, powered by burn, blah 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 blah. Maximum thrust 186 point something kilonewton. Where is the? Okay, come on. Let me see. Let me just search for LEO, low Earth orbit. LEO. Payload to LEO is 13,000 kilograms, and geostationary transfer object 5,000 kilograms. That is this guy, LMV3. But we are talking about the other one, right? NGLV. So let me see what is this guy's payload to LEO. Doesn't tell you. Okay, 30 to 70 tons to LEO. And geostationary transfer. Okay, this seems to be a significant improvement, but 5 times better to GTO than. Okay, that's interesting. So when will it be developed? It is being developed currently, and blah, etc., etc. When will it come into? When is the first test expected to be? List of launches 2031. Okay, that's enough. I've seen enough. 2031. Okay, so like I said, I am not somebody who likes to be cynical. I'm glad this is happening. The NGLV, new next generation launch vehicle, seems to be a significant improvement on what we have. It doesn't seem to have reusable boosters and all that, which is very disappointing. But it's progress nonetheless. But it's not going to be able to compete with SpaceX or anything. Absolutely no competition. So okay, we are doing some progress. If you give sufficient funding for new projects that involve reusable launch vehicles and boosters that can be used multiple times, that can land themselves. If you give the funding, I am sure within 5 to 10 years, our engineers will be able to develop something as good as what SpaceX has. But we are not doing it. And that's what disappoints me the most. I'm not disappointed with ISRO, with the chairman of ISRO, or the engineers in ISRO. I am disappointing with the entity that controls ISRO, which is the government of India. Very disappointing. Very disappointing indeed. Okay. Siddharth Singh Rajpurohit says, what could be the possible geopolitical scenario if this coalition government manages to remain in power till 2029? The Modi government. What changes will the Modi government do? Well, I don't know what changes the Modi government will do, but let me tell you what changes they should do and what I would like them to do. Find a way to repatriate all the illegal infiltrators out of India. Whatever Bangladeshi infiltrators we have, 50 to 100 million, whatever, repatriate them some way or the other. Get all the Rohingyas out of India and back to their homeland. We don't need or want them here in India. And get rid of all the cookie infiltrators who have infiltrated into India from Myanmar or wherever else. That is the first thing the government of India, if they can achieve this by 2029, it will be like the most incredible thing ever. That's something India should do. Secondly, we need to significantly bolster our naval strength. Okay, we need a much larger navy. We need to especially invest in large quantities of submarines. In the next 5 years, if they can somehow acquire or build five, I know it's a long shot what I'm saying. I'm not naive here, but let's say we increase the number of submarines by at least five, or ideally 10. That'd be great. At least 100 more fighter planes, and we need to have an arsenal of at least 10,000 or 20,000 different kinds of missiles. That's what you need. And obviously keep on growing the economy at least 7-8% a year, and keep building the infrastructure, the roads, highways, railways, new airports, high-speed railway, bullet trains, all of that. So yeah, all these things need to be done. I hope even if like a tenth of that is done, it will be great, especially the eviction of the foreigners. So that's what the government ideally should do to make India a better place, a safer place. How much will they do? I have no idea. I don't know. I hope I'm trying to be positive here. I am a very overall very positive person, not cynical person. I would like this to happen, and I'm sure the government can achieve this. So let's keep our fingers crossed and be optimistic. VRV says NGLV has reusability. Please check. Okay, fine. Thank you for that pointer. I will check it out. Sure. I just very quickly went through the Wikipedia article, and Wikipedia anyway is not that reliable. So, but I will check it out. Sure, surely. Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate that. Okay, let's take a couple of other questions. Harshal Mungikar says, do you think that if voting exercise is made mandatory practice for all citizens, will it help in the outcome of elections? Would we have a more stable, balanced government? No. Let me tell you why. What really matters in a democracy is not how many people vote, whether it's 50% voting or 70% voting or 98.9% voting or 100% voting. That doesn't really affect the outcome and the future of a nation in a democracy. Excuse me. What really matters in a democracy is that every person who votes is well informed and they are voting. See, democracy fails if the citizenry, if the voters are ignorant, illiterate, and misinformed or ill-informed or uninformed. Democracy can work properly only if everybody is illiterate, educated, and really well informed, and they have the ability to think critically and properly. Only then will they make the right choice. Then propaganda won't work on them. And of course, they need to be patriotic. You can't have a certain percentage of the population in a hypothetical country X, where you have, let's say, 27% or 32% who are anti-nationals, who have an allegiance elsewhere. I'm talking about a hypothetical scenario, okay? I'm not naming any specific nation here. You see that? So democracy can work only when the population satisfies this criteria. Making voting mandatory, but half the people are illiterates, then what's the point of the voting? Those votes can be bought, or the people can be easily brainwashed and misled. Then what's the point of voting? So mandatory voting does nothing. It doesn't affect the outcome of elections, and it does not help in the stability of the government or the country. What you need is a fully literate, fully patriotic, and a highly informed population that is immune to misinformation. And you will never find such a population, which is why democracy will never work, unfortunately. You see, that's the problem. John V. Jaiswal says, please shed some light on Ladakh in your position on Sonam Wangchuk. Sonam Wangchuk is a foreign agent. He has deep connections with various organs of the West, NGOs, Ford Foundation, Mohammed Yunus, the new illegitimate regime in Bangladesh, all of that. Sonam Wangchuk is a foreign agent. He is acting against the interests of his own country. Okay? Very clear. You can look it up, but you will have to do some research. I cannot suddenly on the spot bring all the different pieces of evidence and present them here. I can't. What I will urge you, what I will invite you to do is do your own research. Look at the sources of his funding. Look at the places he visits. Look at the organizations he's associated with. Look at the politicians he's friends with. Look at the NGOs and organizations outside of India that he's associated with. Look at the things he protests against. Look at did his protests start? What causes was he protesting against? And did his protests start with the beginning of the cause, or was the problem already there earlier? And what is the envisaged outcome of his protests? And which country does in which country's interests does it work in favor of, and which country's interests do his protests hurt? You have to look at all these factors. It'll take you time to do this, but if you're genuinely interested in finding out what's happening, please do it. I assure you, this individual, Sonam Wangchuk, is a foreign agent. He's working against the interests of his own country. It is shameful that we have people like these who can be so easily bought out and they work for superpowers. Shameful, really. Okay. All right. Is there one last question? Okay, let's see this one. Shyam says, why doesn't ISRO try landing a smaller rocket and perfect the technology that will earn some money, more money due to reusability while working on larger rockets for larger payloads? Look, any project that ISRO does needs to get a green light from the government of India. The nature of the system is such that ISRO cannot do a single thing without first getting written approval from the government of India. The government of India owns ISRO. ISRO is an organization that comes under the government of India. So it can't do a single thing. It can't start a single project without explicit approval. And if it says that so and so project should be started, it has to create a proposal, and the chairman has to submit it to the government. The government bureaucrats and the whole machinery will go through it, and eventually, after a few months, he will get yes or no. So I'm not sure if such proposals have been submitted. And if they have been submitted, well, clearly no progress has happened, because there is no project in ISRO about trying to get rockets to land autonomously on their own. So it's unfortunate, but that's where we stand today. Creative Hour says, are there any chances of World War III? Right now, it is the possibility, the probability is low, and let's keep it that way. Okay. All right, come on, we're done with it today. Thank you very much, everybody. Trupti Patil, well, let's take one last question. There is two-tier policing in the UK. There are riots every now and then. Do you think UK is becoming an Islamic nation? Of course. The future of UK is Islamic. And all the best to the UK. And I would say congratulations. It is what it is. They've done it to themselves. So good for them. It's what their leaders chose. So be it. Doesn't affect me. Doesn't affect us. It's their problem. It's their future. And they are the masters of the destiny. So let them enjoy it. All right. With this, we are at the end of today's session. Thank you so much for so many different diverse questions. I hope I've answered, I think I've answered a lot of questions, and I'm sure there are many of you whose questions I could not answer. To those of you, I apologize, and I will hopefully take your questions in the next live session. Next weekend, I'll probably be in Jaipur, so I will not have a live stream, but the weekend after that, we'll be back. So thank you so much. And until then, take care, keep asking questions, keep raising your standards, and I'll see you in the next session. Thank you. Bye.